Dr. Pieper is here. She is the program director for the USC Annenberg Inclusion Initiative. And I'm very excited for what she's going to share with you today. The topic is breaking the cycle. A lot of what we see year after year is, we'll get one step forward and then we roll back. And so how do we really persevere, shot glass, right? With all of those changes. I have stalled enough. Thank you so much. Oh, and for those of you asking for coffee and snacks, end of the hall, open all day. Yeah. Everyone is whatever works. You tell me. All right. Well, good morning. It's nice to be here. As I mentioned, I'm the program director. My name is Dr. Katherine Pieper. I'm going to walk you through a little bit about the Annenberg Inclusion Initiative in case you're not familiar, and then share a little bit of data from our latest reports. So the Inclusion Initiative was founded by Dr. Stacy Smith in the early 2000s. You may have heard of us. We're based at USC, so fight on if that's something that you like to do. If not, just bear with me. And we work really in 5 major areas across film, episodic, digital programming, and the music industry. We look at who's working on screen, on stage, on the popular charts. We look at who's working behind the scenes in the studio from the executive ranks all the way through below the line positions in film. We're very interested in barriers and opportunities for folks from historically marginalized communities as they move into entertainment spaces. We conduct economic analyses related to inclusion and financial performance to bust myths and counter, misunderstandings about what makes money. And that's the polite way to say it, I think. And lastly, we're very interested in creating and advocating for solutions for change. And as you can see from the bottom, our research cuts across several topic areas and is often intersectional. So today, I just want to share a few pieces of insight from a couple of studies we put out between January and March. We've had a very busy Q1. We always do. We tend to look at the year behind and tie that into some longitudinal research that we conduct every year. And so to date, we've evaluated 1,700 top grossing films from 2007 all the way through 2003. So one thing we always look at is who are the leads and co-leads of popular films. And in 2023, we found that just 30% of top grossing films had a woman in a girl or a woman in a leading or co-leading role. And this is a downturn from the progress that we'd seen up until 2022. We'd reached 44% and then it fell to 30. This is about where the number was in 2010 and reverses the progress that we've seen. And, some people said, well, maybe it was the strikes, right? People push their films. That's a good explanation. We said, let's look at it. It's not the strikes. Can't account for that. We also looked at folks from underrepresented racial or ethnic groups leading films. We saw a slight amount of progress, so from 31 to 37 in 2023. Seems great, right? Where it's a bright spot for sure. That number is accounted for primarily by international films that made it into the top 100 and by smaller independent distributors, so not accounted for by the legacy studios. Oops. And lastly, we were interested in, of course, women of color. In 2023, 14 films were led by a girl or woman of color. That's a drop from 18 in 2022. And importantly, only 1 woman of color was age 45 or above in a leading or co-leading role. Now, there were only 3 women overall, so I guess that's a third. Make of that what you will. 32 men, 45 or above, got to lead a film last year. So of course, we're always curious, not only about who's leading films, but who's working behind the camera. So when we look at directors across the top 100 films of 2023, 12% of directors were women. This is really no change since about 2018, consistent with years previous. When we turn to underrepresented directors, again, 22.4%, that's 26 directors. Not really a change from the year before or even since 2018. So kind of holding steady in terms of where we're seeing progress. Lastly, when we're interested in women of color who are directing top films, only 4 women of color directed a top film in 2023. And across 1,700 films, that number is less than 2%. It's 25 movies. So in terms of progress, we're really still not seeing huge gains in either of these areas. And so I'm here obviously to bring down the excitement in the room, to give you the bad news.
I'm sorry, we're not sharing to Zoom, and I'm tired of, I just want to make sure that they're seeing this.
Sounds good. I'm actually done with the slides.
Oh, well.
You can just put it on this one and we'll be done. But you have them, so we can share them with Zoom later. And so what we see happening in this data on top film is either a lack of progress, right? Consistency. We see reversal in some areas. And it's difficult to know why, right? It's occurring, and that's where the rest of our work comes in, right? Is this a fatigue issue? Are people tired? Is it accounted for by folks thinking that one film can change them all, which it can't, right? That's not the recipe for sustained change. We know that myths about financial performance of films starring women and people of color, they continue to persist. And that's despite quite a bit of research that we've published countering those myths about what makes money. And I think it's easy to look at data like this and grow discouraged, right? To, again, bring the mood down, as it were. But I think if you look closely, there are indicators that there is, space to be hopeful. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, we have seen change. There have been years when we've seen change, right? So the goal is to understand what was driving that change and then to replicate it and extend it so that the change is actually more significant and substantial, right? Incremental change is a recipe for larger change. And so how do we look at what barriers still exist? What decision-making biases still persist in studios and production companies and hiring practices and agencies and all the places where we know money flows through and decisions get made. How do we identify the levers of change that we still need to pull? And if you ask Stacy Smith, who founded the initiative, she'll tell you there's about 5 or 6, and you can call us and we'll tell you what they are in terms of what actually creates change. How do we uniquely pull those levers to accelerate progress and create opportunities? And lastly, how do we consult with experts, right? Bring folks in who can help us identify barriers, counter biases, and champion change in ways that we haven't seen before. And so I think the last thing to do is, of course, and I'm completely biased here, we have to continue to track the numbers, right? We have to, I'm an advocate for myself while I have a microphone. It's what you get to do. But you have to continue to track because without numbers, we don't know when there's a change that's in a positive direction, when there's stalled progress, or when we're moving in reverse. And so I think by all of us together, capturing the data points that we have in front of us, tracking progress, understanding what moves the needle, then we can move forward and create change. So thank you very much.
I'd like to welcome the wonderful award-winning Sam Sanders, who's the host of Vibe Check and Intuit, to kick us off for this panel today. And if I could also invite the other panelists for the BRIC panel to come up into your chair.
Yeah.
Can I get mics on?
Now it's on. Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. My name is Sam Sanders, and I've been a podcaster and radio journalist for about 15 years. And I'm currently watching podcasting go through a similar story as Hollywood. There was a lot of money and a lot of opportunity and a lot of new stuff. And then there wasn't. And then all the things people were saying about what they were going to do to make everything better, they just shut up. So I'm really excited to talk about the things going on in Hollywood in the same vein and how we can move forward in this moment. One of my least favorite things about panels is when the moderator reads the introductions for the panelists because they can introduce themselves better than I ever could. So I'm going to now let my panelists tell y'all who they are. Go ahead.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Laverne McKinnon, and I think of myself as someone who thrives helping people across their finish line. And so I do that in a number of different ways. I'm a film and television producer. I'm a professor at Northwestern University, and I'm also a career coach. And what I'm really going to be talking about today on the panel is I'm a grief recovery specialist. And perseverance is really linked quite closely with grief work, but I'll get into that a little bit more deeply in a moment.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Brandon Williams. I work at ABC Universal, leading our talent development and inclusion team, specifically for the studio group. For the last 20 years, I've been in entertainment. And so I'm also a believer of second chances. So a lot of the work that I do is helping people grow and develop and creating access and opportunities for people. I also sit on the board of the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, which helps people who are formerly and currently incarcerated have second chances, redemption, and hope. And so I take that into my world in all that I do. And so it's also part of the work that I do internally in our workforce and on our productions.
All right.
Hey everyone, my name's Karia. My background's in tech, so maybe a little bit different than most of the people in the room from the entertainment industry. I've started several companies and taken them through a full life cycle, and my personal journey has been chasing other people's definitions of success and then seeing that that's not suited for me. And along that journey, it's been really trying to break cycles and find what's authentic to myself and bring value back into the communities that I care about instead of taking value away. So excited to be on the panel with you guys.
Yeah. All right. Let's get to it. My first question for all of you, and I want you all to try this one out. We have just talked about the changes in our industry. We've seen the rollback of DEI. We've seen the strikes. We've seen big studios say that in this new reality, they're just going to make less stuff. With all these factors and what y'all see from your vantage points, I want you to tell me how bad you think it is for people from marginalized backgrounds, especially young people. You can give me a score. You can give me a scale of 1 to 10, a letter grade, but how bad does it look to you and why? Start with you, Brandon.
Oh, the pressure. So look, I think the entertainment industry is a microcosm of the world that we're in, right? And so when we look at what's happening in the world, of course, it's going to happen in the industry that we work in. So just think bigger and broader around what are we seeing from an economic standpoint? What are we seeing from the healthcare standpoint? What are we seeing from a overall DEI standpoint, from queer people to women rights? Just look across the board. It's scary. So to give a number,
Sure.
I think I would struggle. I am someone who rates really hard. So my score will be very low.
Okay.
And so sorry to my
Ballpark it.
sorry to my team members that are in here, but
Ballpark it.
it would be a 4
Out
out
of-
of
okay.
10. Right. So
Okay.
not even we're not there. We're taking many
Not even
steps
halfway
back.
there.
We're not even halfway there. We haven't been, right? We've seen
Mm.
progress, and thanks to the data that was shown earlier. Data is important. And I think we have to look at the data to then match it to other aspects of data and also thinking about what's happening. So data alone won't tell the story,
Yeah.
but we have to look at the data, then match it to the realities of what's happening. And I think you can take it on a local level more so than thinking bigger and broad. If we try to change the industry, that's going to take a while.
Yeah.
But there's things you can do internally with where you are today.
Okay. So a 4. What you got?
I don't have a number, but I'd like to look at it. Yeah, I think that, and I wouldn't rate as hard as Brandon anyway, but I like to look at it from the lens of, okay, yeah, things are in flux and it's a difficult spot right now, but that also creates a lot of different opportunities because like, things are changing so much. And coming from tech and seeing what's happening in entertainment, and there's so many things converging, it's also opening up lots of opportunities for people that are thinking outside the box and trying to come at it from different angles. And I think that is also really important for like breaking down old systems because, you know, again, I always come back to this lens of, you know, what do I want and why do I want it? And I think being able to do things for ourselves really helps to explore that more. So.
I like that. All right.
I
Laverne?
think I'm close to Brandon. I'm probably like a 3 or a 4 today
Okay.
in this moment, but
Yeah.
I also have to say that I don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, so there could be opportunity, but
Yeah.
my greatest concern is honestly just the barriers to entry,
Mm.
that it's going to require a level of perseverance and resilience to be able to navigate how much the industry is literally shrinking.
Yeah.
And I get concerned about just like in terms of the economics of how is someone going to be able to live a life in Los Angeles and
Mhm.
say, okay, I'm going to play this out for 2, 3, 4, 5 years?
Well, yeah, it's hard. Well, and then you think about barriers to entry. It's hard to now know what to enter. Should I go try to work at a studio? Should I just start making TikToks? Who's paying for that camera? Do I need a YouTube feed? How do I get someone to sponsor my YouTube feed? It's not just a question anymore of barriers to entry. It's like, where do you start? Where do you actually start? I want to speak specifically to your skill set, Laverne. You talked about the idea of grief and grief counseling being a part of career resilience and perseverance. We talked before this panel about how these two things go together. But before we talked, I had never thought of those two things going together. Um, I want you to tell this room at like a 101 level how processing grief in this moment relates to the industry and finding your career and your place in it.
There's a concept called disenfranchised grief, which is a term that was coined by a bereavement expert named Kenneth Doka. And it describes any type of loss that isn't publicly validated, socially mourned, acknowledged in any way. And so I'm going to give you a couple of examples. A young person, an emerging artist, writer, creative, executive is looking to enter the industry at this moment in time. They have this dream and they land here and there are no opportunities. That's a loss. And then people say, oh, you know what, just give it time. You're just starting out. But it's a significant loss. And without that witnessing and that validation, that individual is not able to grieve, okay, this dream that I had is no longer happening. There are so many people who are being pushed out of the industry right now. I know someone last week who has lost their home, has been evicted. I've heard stories. This is the first person that I know personally. So when grief and loss is not validated, when you don't have permission to mourn, what happens is that your resiliency is chipped away. And there are studies that show that a loss of not being able to process failure leads to a loss of resiliency.
Yeah.
And what we need more than anything is the ability to tap into our resiliency, to be able to persevere in order to go this distance, because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. We just have no sense of it. And it could be, and I'm going to talk about this for 20 more seconds.
No, go ahead.
Which is, it can be career related, but it can also be project related. I've worked incredibly hard on a script and I can't get anybody to read it. Oh my gosh, somebody said yes, it's not greenlit. Oh my gosh, I got my project made and everybody hates it. It tanks. Or, oh my gosh, I got to a first season and now it's been canceled. There's so many layers of loss and there's an expectation of that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
So just keep going. And then people are feeling the sense of burnout. They're losing their sense of motivation and passion. And it's wildly confusing. It's like, I don't understand what's happening to me. And I feel like I'm broken because I'm having difficulty continuing to move forward.
Well, and it seems like in this industry and many others, we're only given permission to grieve certain types of career loss. If you got laid off, everybody gets it. You can be sad. If the
Well,
show got
again-
canceled, everybody gets it. You can be sad. But if you never got the first gig and you're still waiting tables, everyone just says, well, you can't grieve that, right? What is one real and practical way that people in this room dealing with that kind of career grief can start to process it, name it, speak to it in a manner that helps them build resilience? Is there is it me in the mirror every day saying something to myself? Is it a mantra, a practice? What's the one simple everyday thing?
Well, the first step, honestly, is acknowledging it. It's like, I'm grieving and I'm going to give myself permission to mourn. And there are grief rules, but there are no grief rules. Everyone does it differently. But just the fact of self-validation is a really critical step. And then let's be honest, it's like you can't always go out into the world and say, I'm mourning. People don't get it. So it's really being able to share and be witnessed by someone that you can trust or those who really, really get it. And I just really want to quickly touch on something that Ong said earlier about failure. Is the best creative comes from when people take risks. And when you take risks, there's failure. And yet the industry is penalizing people for failure. And so what's happening is that then people shrink into themselves, they stop taking risks, and then what we see is homogenized content.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I have tried to tell myself, honestly, since the pandemic began, when people ask me how I'm doing, I tell them, like I really tell them,
That's so
I'm
great.
sad today. Everyone got on my nerves today. I'm sleepy. Do you have a drink? Um, there's a certain honesty I think the entertainment industry does not value or reward. And I think changing that is the first step, you know? Karia, I want to ask you a question about something you said earlier in this panel. Figuring out what was someone else's version of success and then what was yours. I want me to I want you to give me an example of how you did that in your career. And I then want you to tell the folks in this room how you begin to think about making that distinction.
I think, I'm sorry, I forgot the name of the lady who gave the land acknowledgement at the start. Gina. So I loved that that was how we framed this whole summit and just kind of started it out. And
Yeah.
she used the word colonization, which I think ties so much into all different industries. To me, like where capital lies and where money lies, that's what decides what we care about and where we can put our time and what success is. And so for me, I've gone through a bunch of different stages in my career where it's really chasing somebody's version of success that doesn't look like me, doesn't have my background, doesn't have, care about the things that I care about. And so I think for me, it's really been trying to find, like, tap into my, my cultures and my communities and seeing that, hey, like, oh, they define success a lot differently than, what this person or what this person does. And so I think what I've found is the more that I can tap into that and explore that, the more change I can make, and the more that I feel I can make an impact, and really finding other people that are doing that is, always sets a great example.
Yeah. For me, what's been really clarifying, and I talk with my dear friend and sister Zach about this, especially in creative fields, it's very easy to think that you know what you should do. If I want to make it in this industry, I should do these things. I should do these things. But there's a process I've been trying to take myself through with all my work in the last few years where I categorize the things I think I need to be doing into I think I should be doing this, I need to do this, and I want to do this. And usually the should stuff is other people's expectations, and it will not make me happy, and it is not necessary for my success. The need stuff is the stuff I got to do to keep the lights on, pay the bill, keep my dogs looking good. And the want stuff is actually what I want my career to be. And it took me years to realize that I was telling myself what I needed to do. It was all in the should bucket, and nothing was in the want bucket. And the power of figuring out what you want and saying it, not just to yourself, but to others, it's so clarifying. And I don't think I realized until my 30s that I had not actually figured out how to say what I wanted. Just that is like mind blown.
I don't know if you have the same thing, but I feel like whenever I have that want bucket and I define it, when I share it with someone, a good marker to know that I'm point is if they say you can't do that, or they laugh at it,
Mm-hmm.
because it's usually so far off from
Yeah.
what you should do.
Yeah, yeah. And should is just whenever you hear yourself saying the word should to yourself, slap yourself. The should be could. I could do that. I could not do that. I don't have to do that. I don't have to do that. Anywho, don't get me started. Brandon, we have seen an almost phenomenon of, like, I call it DEI whiplash. I remember 2020 and the uprisings, and I remember every corporate entity in the world saying, we care. I interviewed the marketing head of Gushers, the candy, about their DEI strategy, and it sounded really good. It was great. But you flash forward to now, you're seeing DEI offices dismantled, sometimes quietly, sometimes overnight. I figured that might happen. I didn't think it would happen so quickly. But for people who are in organizations, that are seeing that happen, the DEI rollbacks. How can they keep that work going without the office being there? What are some practical steps to maintain that energy?
Right. Great question. So, of course, we're seeing cycles, right?
Yeah.
Where you see advancements and improvements, and then there are dips. I think the education systems, colleges, universities have done a really great job of that, right? Where
Mm.
they have put money towards, departments that are really focused on this, and employers, we oftentimes follow the process of the education system. So yeah, we've seen programs roll back, we've seen departments roll back. I oftentimes get asked, where should this work sit within an organization? And the answer I give is everywhere.
Mm.
Oftentimes we put this work on the shoulders of one person or on a department to be the ones to solve the needs that are happening really on the local level. So I always say it should sit everywhere. So when we talk about programs, I think programs are great and they're needed and necessary, but I think that's the kind of entry point to when we're talking about diversity, right? As I have a seat at the table, or they see me, but are they really hearing my voice, right? Deloitte, they put out a maturity model some years back and they've continued to evolve it. If you've looked at their DEI maturity model, what they say is it starts at what we call compliance, which many people are still in, the compliance. Then you move to programmatic, where a lot of work happens, where there's events and programs and ways to showcase people. But where we really want to get to is the next phase, which is leader led,
Mm.
right? Where you actually find that people are owning this from different areas and different places, and it doesn't sit on the department. And ultimately, you want to get to a place where it's integrated, right? That place where it's just part of the process. Right now, it still feels like it's a program or an event, but what we really need to do is think about what are those practices, what are the processes, what are the systems that are in place that we need to change. And for those of you who are in a role anywhere, no matter what it is you're doing, you'd be in marketing. What is your marketing process? Where does bias show up in your process in the way that you work? Who are you forgetting about when you are customizing, segmenting, and thinking about your audiences, right? How do you infuse that into the process and your practices so that if you leave, the process is still there, right? It's not tied to something that's a person, but more so to the way that you all work. And so that's one area that I really kind of acknowledge and
Yeah.
focus on. Let's move away from some of the programs and really focus on how do we dismantle the system and create new systems and practices in place.
Yeah. I have a follow-up on DEI. I saw it play out in a few companies over the last few years. And there's this really interesting thing that happens when a lot of mostly white institutions think they have to do it. They set up this DEI office. There's a big announcement. It sits over here. Everyone else is over there. And the DEI office has no budget, no staff, no power. They're at the table, they're at the meetings, but they aren't empowered. And they can't actually force change because they have no power. I don't think we're going to be in this DEI drought forever. But if it comes back stronger, how can corporations avoid that pitfall? Because I saw a lot of places do that and think that they were doing work.
Right. So it was about 8 years ago, I was living in London, working for another company. And part of my job there was also focusing on inclusion efforts. And the Speaker of the House at the time, before he retired, he wanted to think about ways to help all organizations in the UK with diversity efforts, whether you're a nonprofit with little to no funding to organizations, railroad road services, the Surrey Police, everyone, that bigger organization with bigger funds. How do you help sustain those efforts?
Mhm.
And it can be sustained. So we did a lot of research around what are just some of the general practices that are happening. And so I would kind of encourage people to step through that process of thinking about the employee life cycle, or what is your production life cycle? How do you take each piece of that and think about what should you change? What can you do differently? That doesn't cost anything, right? One, to say hello to someone doesn't cost you anything, right? To say, are you okay? Doesn't cost anything. And you were talking earlier about grief. And oftentimes we don't check in on people if it's something related to their identity, but it's okay to check in with someone if they lost a parent or a loved one. It's one and the same. We shouldn't look at it any differently. So how do we take those same practices and just apply it to other places? This is happening in the world. Just want to check in on you. How are you? We're not asking you to solve for anything, whether you're in a leadership role, we're just asking you to check in. Say, I'm here if you need any support. So I think we have to decouple and like not make it so complex
Mm.
because it really isn't complex. It's just a practice and figure out ways to make sure it's everyone's job to focus on inclusion and not just a department or, you know, in our company, it's integrated. So I don't just do diversity and inclusion. I lead a talent development team.
Mm.
So focus on growing and developing in all people.
Yeah.
So every piece of my work has an inclusion effort into it, where we focus on bias, where we focus on the process. So it's woven into more of an integrated approach. And I think that's the direction that we need to get to.
Yeah.
That we get away from this ambiguous title of DEI, because it also comes with backlash of, oh, that thing,
Mhm.
right? Oh, you're talking about that. We also talk about words like psychological safety, which some people cringe when they hear, like, oh my God, I can't tackle that. Well, we're not asking you to tackle it. What we're asking you to have is humility, right? Be authentic, be honest, communicate. That's what it is those behaviors. So just how do we simplify it and not make it so big and complex
Yeah.
while giving people tangible things to do?
Yeah. I know we're almost at time, but at events like this, speakers are full of advice for people about how to navigate and handle career. And I think a lot of times we talk about good advice, but I always like to talk about bad advice and things that we should just stop telling people. I want the three of you to tell me the worst bit of career advice you've gotten, why you didn't take it, and why you hope to never hear it again.
I
Go
can
ahead.
start. The first career transition I made, so I started my career as don't hold it against me, a lawyer.
It's okay.
And very quickly I realized I was looking at the people that, I was working to become, have my life like theirs. And I'm like, I don't want that. That's not what I want. And so I quit and just moved without a plan, without a really, a next step thought out. And the guy that I worked for, who was someone I looked up to, he said, "You're throwing your career away.
Mm,
You're never going to be able to recover from this.
Mm.
You're throwing your career away." And I was young enough at the time where I was like, "Damn, am I actually?" He's probably right.
Yeah.
But looking back on that now, I'd say that's probably the worst piece of advice, because it was
Mhm.
I hadn't like figured out my purpose or my values really yet, but I knew that it wasn't there, and so I just wanted to like move away from that and try and go closer to whatever that might be.
Thank you.
I'd probably say about 15 years ago, I was
Mhm.
advised to not draw attention to myself, just continue doing a good job. Don't bring too much attention to yourself.
Mm.
Granted, for some that may work well, but for most people it doesn't. And so can't just keep my head down.
Yeah.
I can't just be quiet.
Yeah.
I do have an opinion. It is rooted in experience. And so I lifted my head up and I shared it. And some of that advice actually came from my parents of, you have a really good job. Don't mess that up.
Mm.
And I've defied my parents many years ago, and I continue to do that. And I will say that they're very proud of me now
Yeah.
to see that I did not follow their advice that they given me, which was also similar career advice that I've been given.
Yeah. Your parents are not always right. Sorry.
Yeah, because I think it comes from this place of should.
Yeah.
And so I don't have a specific example because I think all advice is bad advice, especially when it's unsolicited.
Yeah. Snaps for that. Yeah.
And then to build off of what you said, because typically people are giving advice because they're responding to what's in their best interest and their
Mhm.
purpose and their values.
Yeah.
And then to bring it back to the grief component is that people are not looking for advice on how to grieve or how to mourn. What they're looking for is to say, I see you, I see your pain,
Mhm.
I empathize with your pain, I share your pain.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say, whenever anyone starts to give me advice that starts with a kind of, well, in my day, well, we used to do it this way. Well, it was really, really hard for me. Shut it down. That person is not giving you advice. They just are telling you that they want you to suffer like they did. I want less suffering, not more suffering. Less suffering, not similar suffering. Also, I don't want to do it how you did it back in the day. Y'all used fax machines too. Like, we're past these things. We're past these things. So yeah, that for me. If anyone ever starts to tell you in my run, run away. I think we're at time, but you let me know if we are. We are. We got 3 minutes. Is there anything else that y'all want to get off your chest in front of these beautiful people today? Floor is y'all's.
I'll just say this is energizing. So if you at any point feel discouraged, don't. Kind of going back to what Kareem said earlier about take this as an opportunity to do something different. Take this as an opportunity to create a new cycle as part of this, right? Take this as an opportunity to pitch a new job or a way of working or just something new or different. So take this as your charge to keep going, as a boost of energy and more fuel, not to just kind of sit and do nothing.
Love that. I guess one thing I would add would be aspirationally, I feel like everybody, regardless of what industry you're in, like where you're at in your career, having a goal of owning, even if it's a little bit of what you're making, of what you're creating, whether that's in, your next project or in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, like having that goal in mind, I think is crucial and ties back to, just like flipping the script and breaking the cycle. So
I think my final thought is really around just because I'm obsessed with grief and loss, which is that someone was talking earlier about agency, and that's ultimately what grief work does, is that it gives you permission to mourn, look at the narrative that you're creating. What is the meaning that you're creating around the loss that you've experienced, and then to regain a sense of agency and to come back to a place of wholeness.
Yeah, I love that. I'll close with this. I had a rough career year last year, and my dear friend Brandon, who's here in the room, said this very small thing to me that totally flipped my perspective. He said, Sam, you're going to have a very long career, and this is just a blip. This is just a blip. So I would urge all of you to remember that what we're experiencing now, what you're experiencing now, is one thing, one day, one moment, 1 year, and a life and career that will hopefully be very long. And a lot of the things that seem like the biggest, worst thing today, we will not remember in a month, in a year, in 5 years. So I tell myself that when I'm having a bad day. It's just a blip. It's just a blip. This, just a blip. It will get better. With that, thanks to my panelists. Thanks to BRIC for having us. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Thank you.